who are trying to do computer science, but they don't have computer literacy. In other words, they are trying to work as a developer, but they don't really know how to use a computer, right? They haven't had much practice at using basic apps like Word and Excel, or browsing for folders using the command line, and they don't know much about computer hardware. So I'm going to go over each of these topics in more detail and suggest some areas of knowledge that you should have before you even start coding. Because a lot of the developers who say that their job is really difficult, what they're actually struggling with is computer literacy and not computer science. So, first topic I mentioned, browsing through folders. What does that mean? So, Windows includes this application called Windows Explorer, and it gives you a graphical representation of all the files on your computer. And I met one developer who didn't know where his code was stored on his computer. So, like here I have this folder open called Downloads Cleaner. It has my Visual Studio Solution file. He didn't know how to open up this folder. Whereas for me, I know it's in Documents, GitHub, and then the name of my application. So if I wanted to maybe edit the solution file in Notepad++ or something like that, those type of things are much easier to do if you can just browse for the file. Or maybe I want to go inside of here, and maybe there's a file that maybe Visual Studio isn't showing all the files that are not included in the project. If I want to verify that a file is there, I can just look for it in the folder browser and just find it that way. So it's an essential tool to have when you're coding. And the best way to get practice at navigating folders is probably just to keep your own files organized. Keep your documents well organized, your movies, your music, that sort of thing. Keep those well organized and you'll get a lot of practice at navigating through folders. And a similar skill to that is being able to use the command line. So when I opened up Command Prompt, it starts me off at C users JadeP, and if I wanted to switch to the C drive, I was able to type in this command and navigate to the C drive. And then if I want to see all the files and folders on my C drive, I just type dir for directory, shows me the directory listing, and you're going to need to use skills like this in any coding job. Probably the best example is using Git, the most popular source control app. I know there are GUIs made for Git, but in every GUI I've tried, there's always some features that are not implemented in the GUI, and I've had to use the command line as well. So that's another essential skill to learn before you start coding, or if you're already a coder, it's not too late to go back and practice these skills. Using basic apps like Word and Excel. I mean, there are some computer programmers who have only passed computer science exams and they just haven't spent much time using a computer, right? So why would a developer need to use apps like Word and Excel? Well, one thing I use Excel commonly for is just keeping track of my work. I mean, the grid structure makes it perfect for that. So let's say you've just coded a feature like a name and address form, or any feature really. There's going to be many different test cases that you'll have to test. Like maybe you have a bunch of different validation rules, like some fields are required, some have a max length, some have a min length. So for each field you're going to have to run through each of those test cases individually if you really want to be sure your app is working. And there might be multiple test cases for each field, so that's why I have those 3 lines repeated right there. So that's a great use of Excel. You can also use Excel formulas to generate code. So I've had to do quite a few data updates where there's many records that need to be updated, and I was able to use the Excel concatenate function to generate the SQL statements to update those records. And of course, PowerPoint is another basic app that is useful for developers if you're on an agile team and you need to give a demo every 2 weeks. It helps to give some background info before you actually do your demo, and just have some information included in a PowerPoint presentation. Another area of missing knowledge that I've seen is knowing what are file formats. So here I have two files, mypic.bmp and mypic.jpg. So this picture is a logo for this channel that I've made in MS Paint. And by the way, that's another great skill to have that's not really computer science, being able to just make a simple picture like this in Paint. You never know when you might need to make your own icon for your app or for a button or something like that. You know, it'll be a little bit weird to tell your manager that they need to hire a graphic designer just to make one little icon, especially if they don't care if it looks sloppy or anything. So, you know, a lot of people will think, oh, I have this bitmap file, and if I want to make a JPEG, they think they can just like copy the file and just change the file extension, so the ending of the file name. And Windows gives me a warning that, you know, changing this file extension might be something you don't want to do. I'll just confirm that I want it. And this is not really a JPEG file. It's a bitmap file that has been renamed to JPG. And you'll see the same concept in many different file formats, like WAV versus MP3, or different video formats, right? So the contents of the file are actually different. So this JPEG, I actually opened it up in Paint and did save as JPEG. And we can see the file sizes are different. This one's 10.5 kilobytes, whereas the original bitmap is 6.01 kilobytes. So the contents of the file are definitely different in the real JPEG, whereas the one where I just changed the file extension, it has the same file size as the original bitmap. So we can see the contents of the file haven't changed. And interestingly enough, JPEG is actually a compressed format, so it should be smaller than a bitmap. So MS Paint is doing something a little bit weird when it created this JPEG, but I'm just using the file size to show that the contents of the file are actually different. So you're going to need an app to convert between these different file formats, not just renaming the file. For someone who's got a lot of experience using a computer, they would already know those things before they start coding. And if you're missing these topics, it makes coding a lot more difficult. Another aspect is knowing about hardware. How does the computer hardware actually work? You know, I met one developer who asked me, is 80 gigabytes a big hard drive? And that just shows right there that that person is not someone who has built their own computer and decided how big of a hard drive they need based on their needs. You know, are they downloading tons of movies? Do they want to have a lot of games installed at one time? In that case, 80 gigabytes was actually a huge hard drive, because this was just an application server that he was talking about. It's just hosting some executable files, some DLL files. It's not being used to store a database, and it's not being used to store large files like movies or audio and that type of thing. So for someone who has a lot of experience with computers, they would already know those things. That's the type of thing you should already know before you start coding. Another similar topic that I've seen is developers wondering why network operations are slow. So if you need to load something from a remote machine, like a remote database, or maybe some third-party web service like Google Maps or something, why does that take longer than just like comparing two numbers or adding two numbers or something like that? Well, it just shows that these people don't really know what the computer's actually doing when it runs the code that they type. And we see a good explanation here of these different hardware operations and how long they take to happen in nanoseconds. And as a comparison, it shows you that times a billion, just to give you a better feel for how long these things take. So, for example, reading from a disk compared to just doing a CPU operation like adding two numbers together. So if a CPU operation were to take 1 second, then reading from the disk would take about a month, right? So it's scaled up to give you a comparison of how slow the disk operation is compared to just comparing two numbers. And then the example of the network that I mentioned, that's going to be slower than a disk, but probably faster than reading from a tape. I imagine this is a tape on a local machine. Most network access is probably going to be faster than that these days. So when you're wondering, like, why do network timeouts happen, or I've seen a lot of developers who will do one of these remote operations, like writing to a remote database or writing to a remote web service. They'll have that inside of a loop, and they'll be wondering, why does it take so long? Well, you're doing multiple round trips over the network. The network cables, the speed at which you can transfer data over a network cable is much slower than transferring it across your motherboard to the memory. Geographic location also matters. So if you're talking about a server in a different city or a different country, it's going to take longer for the electricity to flow a longer distance over those wires. And even more than that, when the remote server is far away, most likely it's also going to have many different hops to get to that computer. So there's many different computers that the data gets copied to before it reaches you, and the number of network hops is a big predictor in how long a network operation will take. So these are all topics that you're not going to learn in computer science. If you have a BS in computer science, you've mainly learned about data structures and algorithms. And to actually apply that knowledge in a coding job, you're going to need computer literacy before you can actually apply those computer science concepts. If you're looking for a way to practice these skills, the best way is to just use your computer for entertainment, right? Movies, music, and gaming. Back when I was in high school in the 2000s, that's what I was using my computer for, and that's how I got so much practice and learned all these skills, just by using my computer. And then when I went to actually study computer science and read coding books, it was really just the coding that I was learning, because I had so much computer literacy, I had all the background knowledge. If you're looking for more help on coding, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Feel free to post questions in the comments. And if you're into coding, you can code your own video games. And if you want to see the game that I've coded, check out the link in the description to see my game on Steam, Invaders from the Third Dimension. See you later.